One of them is metabolic syndrome. You can control the way you look. You can control the way you look. You can reduce the size of your waist. One of the interesting things, I was just reading an article from National Geographic, and it was all about race. I don't know if you've seen the last issue, but they were saying that anybody that doesn't have their ancestors completely in Africa right now. In other words, you and me and anybody from Asia and anybody from, well, everybody except the people from Africa. They have Neanderthal genes. And one of the Neanderthal genes was to maintain a large waist, a large stomach. And the reason you did that was because that was where you stored all of your excess carbohydrates, your excess fat. So that if there was a lean period, a time where there's famine, and of course around here we're going to have we're in a drought right now. Looks like it's not going to be resolved until, well, who knows when it's going to be resolved, but we're certainly going to have a dry summer. Potentially, if this were the old days, before trucks to transport food, potentially the people in this area could have a famine. It could be a very lean period. So Neanderthal man, of course, he went through these lean periods all the time. And it seems that anybody leaving Africa reproduced with Neanderthal man. So the reason that we have this spare tire, I have one too, I'll admit it, I've got one. I don't want it, but I've got it. The reason we got it is because of Neanderthal man, because that was the shape of his body. He had a big gut. The reason he had a big gut was so that he could maintain extra carbohydrates and whatnot. It's hot. If you can make that thing work, more power to you. Johnny seems to be able to do something with it, but I'm ignorant as far as that's concerned. So the large waist circumference has something to do with it. Has to do with metabolic syndrome. Elevated serum triglycerides, of course, that has something to do with with Neanderthal men as well. They maintained a lot of free-floating fats, and the free-floating fats are in the form of triglycerides. Low HDL cholesterol. HDL cholesterol takes fat out of your body, and for that reason, you would want, if you were in a famine situation, you would want as few HDL cholesterol molecules as possible. What you'd want would be triglycerides. That would mean that you have eaten. Any luck? Nothing? Okay.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know either.
We'll see.
We'll see. It was 83 when I was over there before. It's still 83? Well, maybe the heat will kick off. Just in case. Elevated blood pressure, of course, due to the fact that you've got this big gut, you've got all those fats floating through your system. And the last is glucose intolerance, of course, and that's type 2 diabetes. People with metabolic syndrome have a significantly higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease and developing diabetes. And we're going to talk about this more, but as you can see, this shape of this individual is consistent with developing not only cardiovascular disease, but also with diabetes. Tobacco use, smoking more than doubles the chances of a heart attack or stroke. Smoking actually makes your platelets sticky. So if you smoke, then the probability of having a stroke or developing a blood clot someplace is very high. It tends to be relatively high. On average, men who smoke die 13.2 years earlier than non-smokers. I told you about my friend that just died. And I told him to stop smoking, and he told me how stupid I was and how ignorant I was, and how he was going to dance on my grave, and now he's dead and I'm still alive. Not just alive. I ran this weekend. I ran and lifted weights this weekend. So, my God, I'm not just alive. I'm moving, and he's 6 weeks into the grave. So, who's laughing now? Obviously, it's me, since he can't do nothing. Female smokers down average 14.5 years earlier than their non-smoking cohorts. 1 year after quitting, the risk of cardiovascular disease has been reduced by 50%. So all he needed to do was stop smoking, and it would have reduced his the probability of cardiovascular disease by a factor of 50%, which is a lot. 22% of men and 17.5% of women continue to smoke, and most of those individuals are white. Of course, American Indians smoke at a higher rate than anybody else. I don't see it so much here, but on the other reservations, especially the ones in Oklahoma, they don't have any reservations, but they have a lot of. Oklahoma has the second largest smoking population in the United States. Number 1 is Arkansas. Number 2 is Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a very large percentage of American Indians in it. If you go up to the reservations in Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota, lots of smokers up there. Up there, they claim that it keeps them warm in the wintertime, which is completely counter-indicated. Obviously it is, because it's a vasoconstrictor. So the probability is that you're cutting out your circulation, and you should be getting colder. These people tend to be blue if they smoke a lot. Why are they blue? Because of the poor circulation in their faces and hands, unfortunately. Friedman and Rossman came up with a way of looking at individuals. They came up with a way of typing individuals. The type A personality is as an individual that is competitive, hurried, hostile, and of course these individuals, the more hostile, the more hurried, the more competitive you are, the more it increases your probability of cardiovascular disease. As compared to the hurried and harried person is the type B personality. They're far more relaxed. They're not pressured by time, and they tend to be resistant to coronary disease. Of course, I claim to be a type B personality because I don't care when you guys turn stuff in. I know today is supposed to have all your papers due today, but you know, you get them in before May. You get them in sometime. Come on, just get them in sometime. If everybody turned in their papers on time, I would have 116 papers to read tonight. And of course, I'm not going to do that. So just turn them in whenever you get them done. I'm telling those of you, and oh, wait a minute, I don't have anybody in TV land. Yeah, this is, okay. Anyway, okay, type A personalities, they have more rapid blood clotting, type A personalities. They have higher cholesterol and triglyceride levels under stress. When they are under stress, they have higher cholesterol and triglyceride levels. They have greater autonomic arousal, elevated heart rate, and higher blood pressure in the face of challenging events. They tend to be combat ready all the time. They're always looking for a fight, which is kind of a curiosity. I was in a meeting the other day, and everybody's getting all excited. I can't even remember what they're getting all excited about. Of course, I didn't care. There's nothing I can do about it, so why in the world get excited about it? And I'm just kind of sitting there, and everybody's just blasting away at whatever the situation. I think it was the budget. They were talking about the budget. Of course, I'm just kind of sitting there going, like I give a flying flip. You know? I don't know if you had Sewell, but she's going, "What's wrong with you, Bradway? What's wrong with you? Why don't you get upset about these things?" Oh my gosh. Yeah. Of course, Sarah was sitting there, and she was kind of, you know, she just kept sticking me and trying to get me excited. And I'm not going to get excited. I'm sorry. It's not that important. Anyway, so evidently I'm not a type A personality. I am I don't give a shit personality. I think that's a type B. Anxiety and depression are also associated with type A and cardiovascular disease, of course. Sorry about that. I care about you guys, and that's all I care about here. All the rest of it you can do something with. Don't let it bother you, whatever it is. Hostility is the toxic core of male type A behavior. It consists of a negative attitude that is often long-lasting, and this is really kind of a problem for these individuals. they have this hostile gene. They have something going on in their system, and of course we're trained this in select circumstances. Leadership. This is one of the reasons I don't want to do any leadership. I'd rather not do any, mainly because I can't be mean to you guys. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. When I was in the service, they wanted me to. What did they want me to do? Boss people around, and I just can't. I just can't. I'd rather do it myself. I'm sorry. And usually things got done. I mean, it wasn't like things weren't getting done. It's not like people were dying because I was a poor leader. As a matter of fact, I think I made people care more. I mean, if you have to force somebody to do a job, they're not going to do a very good job. They have to want to do the job. And if they don't, if you've got somebody in the hospital that doesn't really want to be there, you've got dead bodies laying all over the place anyway. So anyway, that was my point of view. Anyway, anger is a negative emotion accompanied by physiological arousal, usually shorter in duration than hostility. When coronary patients were given the Cook-Medley hostility scale, the researchers found that the higher the score on the scale, the more severe the coronary blockage. And, well, I've told you stories about my friend. He's from West Virginia. He was a very conservative individual. Hated Obama. Hated even more Hillary Clinton. Just hated him. I'm not talking about didn't like him. He would have done anything to see them fail. So he's probably one of the Russian troll masters or something. He probably, and he would have done it. In a heartbeat, he would have done it. I couldn't come up with the right preposition. Anyway, so the more, and he died right away. I'm telling you, he had his heart attack. Of course, I had my heart attack, and mine lasted for a couple days. I had 97% blockage, and I still lived for I lived. I'm still alive, okay. But I mean, I didn't like croak or anything. He had his heart attack, and he was in crisis right away. It took me a while to get him to go into crisis, and then even after I went into crisis, they had to air flight me out to Great Falls, about 150 miles south. And I still didn't die in the helicopter, even though they thought I would. Doctors, they want you to die. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. Wait a minute. Let me make sure this is aimed the right way. Okay. Of course, less hostile patients had less coronary blockage, and I think that's one of the reasons why I survived. I was able to survive. The study by Sheckley and et al. In 1983 of men with type A personality showed that the higher the hostility level, the more likely the individual would suffer a fatal heart attack. These individuals were also more prone to die from stress-related diseases. So hostility it can really raise you as far as your job is concerned. If I were more hostile, if I were more aggressive, potentially I would be a very important person at this institution. It could happen. I don't want to be with that guy. I have to be jackasses, but anyway. Anger is a transient emotional response that is triggered by a provocation or the perception of mistreatment. Anger expression is the behavior of a person in a response to the feeling of anger. 20% of fatal myocardial infarctions occur because of an angry outburst. So anger is, hostility is constant negative feelings. Anger is an intense, short-term hostility, you can say that. Okay, so a lot of these individuals, 20% of the people dying from myocardial infarctions, had some kind of an outburst, and this is one of the reasons why, if you're watching a television show, the guy's, shaking his finger and screaming at somebody, and then he keels over and has a massive heart attack. We see that all the time on television, but the reality is 20% of the time that's actually true. Atherosclerosis risk in communities study is a massive study of 13,000 middle-aged men and women. 256 people had heart attacks during the study of the 13,000 people. People who scored highest on the anger scale were 3 times more likely to have a heart attack than those with the lowest scale. So anger, hostility and anger can kill you, literally can kill you. Researchers speculate that anger is as dangerous as more traditional heart attack risks, such as smoking, high-fat diet, and obesity. There's the man that knows how to fix the thermostat.
It's good to be humble then.
It's good to be humble.
Yeah,
that is true.
Angry and basically losing your cool and everything.
There you go. You're right. So all the people in the world, who seems to be the closest to this type A personality? What race of people seems to have more of these individuals in it? Grouchy, hostile. Actually, they're the education system around the world. I noticed this when I went to that international conference. We were talking about all kinds of interesting things, but the people from England and Australia and Canada were the most hostile people. I know, and their educational system is competitive. So rather than, if the two of you guys were needed to find an answer, well, you probably give it to each other. You probably give them the answer. But in their system, they don't do that. They don't share information. It's insane. They don't want to help. They want that person to fail.
What was a heart attack for?
I'm sorry?
What is a heart attack for?
What does it feel like? Heart attack feels like an air bubble under your clavicle. That's what mine felt like. It felt like indigestion. It felt like I needed to burp and I couldn't. Yeah, that was about it. And not only if I did burp, I was drinking soda trying to make myself burp. If I did burp, it didn't help. I felt like there was a bubble right here. Some individuals will have pain down the left arm. Some individuals will have pain in their jaw. I didn't have any of that stuff. I survived. And I survived. I don't know what that means. Well, that means I survived, I guess. Hello!
Hi.
It's Monday. I'm pretty damn sure. Johnny's here. Okay, so lots of risk for heart attack, and this is really serious. This gets really serious when you're dealing with airplanes and pilots, because you don't want your airplane falling out of the sky. You don't want your pilot dying. This is one of the reasons why they have co-pilots on commercial flights. They need them for one thing, but the other thing is, just in case one of the people gets sick, they need somebody to fly the damn plane. A study by Hilbert in 1994 asked myocardial infarction survivors what kicked off their heart attacks. Heart attacks were twice as likely to occur within 2 hours of an angry episode than any other cause. A lot of times it isn't while they're angry, it's after they go back and start thinking about it. That's when your blood pressure really increases. It's not while you're yelling at somebody. Actually, if you do that, you're dissipating your anger. It's when you're sitting and thinking about it. That's when your blood pressure goes up, really goes up. What was I thinking about? Wait a minute. What was I thinking about? I can't remember. Anyway, okay. The individual was angry. The individual that we're talking about here was angry. They were tense. They had clenched fists, and they had gritted teeth. I do not suggest that anybody swear, but the reality is that swearing, as all military people will tell you, dissipates their tension. It decreases their tension. So swearing is actually a good thing. Wow, I said that on tape too. So I guess I'm in trouble. It really does, it dissipates your tension. And that's one of the reasons why, if you've ever been in a really stressful combat military situation, every other word starts with the letter F. I know. So let's go to Sesame Street and talk about words that start with the letter F. Well, let's not do that. It probably would be a bad idea. But it turns out that everything has the ability to have sexual intercourse. As it turns out, chairs, pencils, airplanes, everything seems to have that capability of intercourse, as curious as that is. So it's not a bad thing. It's really not a bad thing. So when you hear somebody swearing, you can think negatively of them if you like, but the reality is they're dissipating attention. And that's not a bad thing. The more they swear, the less likely they are to punch somebody. Of course, the more they swear, the more likely they're going to get the other person to punch them. So that's, I don't know if it decreases the probability of a fight or not. The most frequent cause of anger was arguments with family members, conflicts at work, and legal problems. Number one was arguing with somebody in your family. And that's no big surprise. A longitudinal study looking at warriors who were both type A and type B found that both types had heart attacks at about the same rate. Whether you're a type A personality, type B personality, the probability of having a heart attack is about the same. But when hostility and anger were factored in, hostile and angry lawyers were 7 times more likely to have a heart attack than a type B, somebody with a type B personality. So type B personalities survive heart attacks more than other individuals. So, and this is something that we tell people all the time. Don't suppress your anger. Display your anger. If you display it, then you dissipate it. If you dissipate it, it's not going to affect you anymore. This has been out there since a long time ago, since the 1970s, and we've been telling people not to suppress their anger. Pennebaker in 1992 came out with a study that showed us that this is actually the way it is. And this is one of the reasons I was telling you that go ahead and swear. It dissipates your anger, and it helps. It actually does help. Research with cardiac patients finds that when the patients deny their anger and frustrations, they are 4.5 times more likely to die within 5 years of their original heart attack. So, suppressing your anger can kill you. Counting to 10. Good idea, bad idea. Well, we need to get rid of the anger. So if you can count to 10 and lose your anger, then we're okay. If you're counting to 10 to suppress your anger, now we're not okay. So you really need to not be angry. Then that's okay. Moderation seems to be the saving grace. Research looking at healthcare workers found that the individuals who were the most likely to survive were those who had moderate anger expression. In other words, didn't display it like this guy's displaying. Individuals that got pissed off, maybe punched the wall, and then it was all over with. Moderate displays, and didn't punch somebody, didn't attack somebody, didn't get into a fist fight. It's the individual that had moderate anger expression. Other research found that feeling anxious, jittery, and nervous, and dissatisfied, sad, and sorry elevated the blood pressure, and therefore it's feelings that can kill you. Depression is a strongly implicated risk factor in cardiovascular disease and metabolic syndrome. People who are depressed tend to eat more in order to dissipate their depression. They're trying to fight their depression, so what do? They eat, especially women. Women are bad at this. Men will punch the wall, women will go out and eat ice cream. And the ice cream will make them gain weight. They'll take in fat. Why in the world would they take in fat? Well, they take in fat because of tryptophan. Tryptophan is an animal fat, and it's good for you. It is a precursor to serotonin. So if you eat fat, and hence taking in the tryptophan, then potentially your serotonin level will increase. So chocolate, ice cream, it's all good. It works for women. It doesn't work for men. Strangely enough, it doesn't work for men. So when we are depressed, one of the things we do is we eat fatty foods, and then we develop the metabolic syndrome. Depression, of course, can rival regular exposure to secondhand smoke. Depression is not only not simply an after effect of cardiovascular disease diagnosis, rather an independent risk factor that has a likely genetic and environmental cause, as we very well know. So potentially, whatever the situation that you're in makes you depressed. Potentially you have genes that make you depressed. You probably know whole families of relatively depressed people. It's hard to get them to smile, hard to get them to laugh. It's hard to get them to agree that Eeyore shouldn't be president of the United States. You know Eeyore. Winnie the Pooh's favorite donkey. Depression remains underdiagnosed and often untreated in many people with CVD. And the reason it's underdiagnosed and undertreated is because they think it's an after effect of the diagnosis. So what should you do if you get diagnosed with cardiovascular disease? What should you do? Get depressed? Obviously, that's the wrong answer. So what should you do? I'm sorry? Exercise? Okay, that's what you need to do. You need to exercise. Well, where in the world do you get the energy to exercise?
Be healthy.
Okay, you need to be healthy, you need to exercise. You need to develop a fighting spirit. I'm going to beat this guy. Swearing all the way. You need to develop a fighting spirit. People that are depressed don't have a fighting spirit. As a matter of fact, they would rather just roll over and play dead, and which obviously they will do. My wife's family is that way. If something confronts them, they roll over and play dead. My sister-in-law had type 2 diabetes. I think I've told you the story. She had type 2 diabetes rather than, and her kidneys shut down. So rather than go to dialysis, she decided not to, and she died. That's rolling over and playing dead, or that's rolling over and being dead. In this case, that's exactly what happened. But she was just like her mother. Her mother suffered from depression all of her life. So genetics have something to do with it. And this is what I try to, I'm afraid this is going to happen to my wife. She's not working right now. She's working with the church. Sorry. She's working with the church, but I tried to get her involved in politics. And I think Donald Trump being elected president has really helped, because she's pissed. She's really pissed. Yes! All right. We should elect another asshole. We should elect somebody else that makes her angry. So she's really getting involved in politics, and it's helping a lot. It's too easy to roll over and stop. Socioeconomic status is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease as defined by the lower education level of these select individuals. And of course, since they have a lower education level, they have a lower income level as well. And a European study found that people lower on the socioeconomic status scale were more likely to smoke, more likely to eat an unhealthy diet, and of course to live a sedentary life with little social support. And that's a problem. Let me see how many steps I've taken today. Oh my goodness gracious, only 3,000. Oh my goodness gracious. I have a brother that suffers from PTSD. I've told you my story about my brother. It hasn't really worked for, golly, about 3 decades now, I guess. No, 2 decades. Must be 2 decades. But he walks the dog. He walks the dog and he goes back to the woods and he cuts wood. And that's what he does to stay alive. He does watch a lot of stupid television, but he also exercises a lot. And he eats relatively well, so I think he'll probably survive. I hope. He's a nice kid, smart. The kid is so smart. Doesn't have much education, but he reads all the time. He knows everything. I think I told you that he taught me how to V8 juice bottles. Okay, they're put in. The V8 juice is sprayed in there under pressure. So when they put the cap on, there's no room. There's no air in it. There's no room. So what you have to do in order to shake it up, I don't know, the sediment settles to the bottom. That's the good stuff. So in order to stir it up, you need you can't just shake it, nothing happens because there's negative pressure inside. So what you have to do is you have to vent it. And then you get about this much air in it, and that's enough to stir it up, interestingly enough. You have to vent it, and I never even thought about that. Being the brilliant genius that I am, and my brother, of course, told me how to do that. I'm going, yes! I've been drinking the crap off the top for years and complaining the whole time. And now my brother taught me how to do it. He's brilliant. Jobs are the most stressful. Jobs that are the most stressful are jobs with high productivity, excessive overtime, jobs with conflicting requirements, and jobs with little personal control. Right now I have to write a report. I was supposed to do it Friday, and I didn't do it because I'm lazy. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. So I was going to do it on Saturday, but I didn't do jack squat on Saturday, except I ran 5 miles and I lifted weights. So that's something, but I didn't get anything done. Okay, so I could have done it yesterday. But I ran yesterday. I ran 3 miles. Oh, you've all got papers due, don't you? Okay. Has anybody finished their papers? Okay, all right. So now you know what I'm talking about. You should have done it this weekend. No, all right. So I was the same way. All right, but I have something to write when I get back to my office. The provost is looking for my report. I'm in trouble if I don't get it done. I don't know when the board. It's the board report. Come on. We need a new one of those things. Job strain is defined as a job with high demands and low decision latitude. In other words, you don't get to make decisions about what's going on. Of course, I don't get to make decisions about what's going on here either. But as long as I get to teach my classes, what do I care? Who's in charge anyway? Well, the reality is I'm in charge, because I can quit anytime I want. I mean, geez, I could get Social Security right now. I could get Social Security right now. So if they give me a hard time, I'm out of here, baby. I'm gone. Workers who feel that they have been promoted too quickly and haven't been given the skills that they need to succeed feel high stress. And we just hired a new dean for the SBS and Business College. They put us together with business. I have no idea why, but we have a new dean. They just hired him today, so you guys know as much as I do. I met him actually on Friday. He's out of Tuba City, so it's going to be interesting. I don't know what's going to happen next. He may not like me. He might fire my bony ass. Or my fat ass. I don't know. Whichever one. It's one or the other. I told my wife, I got old man's ass, so I don't know if you want me to come home or not. Do you know what old man's ass is? You lose your gluteus maximus, so you got none of that muscle mass behind you as you did before, so your pants fall down. You can't keep them up. I told my wife I was doing old man's ass. My wife, she's funny. What's going on? Workers who feel stress, those who feel that they have been promoted too slowly, those who feel insecure about their jobs, those who feel that their ambitions have been thwarted. These are the individuals that tend to suffer from stress more than anybody else. It almost worked. Especially complex jobs that make mental demands or require skill and training promote cardiovascular disease. Complex jobs, especially around hostile and hurried workers, is stressful. The worst thing in the world is working with people that are aggressive and hostile. It's horrible. It's horrible. So normally when I go into a shop, and I change jobs all the time, unfortunately. When I usually go into a shop, I usually surround myself with all the most mellow people I can find. Or I tell people that they need to be more mellow. People like to be around me, and I haven't figured that one out yet. I hardly ever say anything when I'm by myself, of course, when I'm around other people. So I don't, but I try to make people mellow out. If they have problems, I just try to mellow them out. And those are the people I like to be around. So I tend to promote that in people. These kinds of jobs around hurried workers promotes a type A reaction to the stress and can cause CVD. And we're talking about type A personalities, we're talking about type B personalities, but it's a spectrum. You're somewhere on the spectrum. The hostile, the hurried, the angry people, they're all the way over to one side. So we've got this kind of A/B personality somewhere in between. Of course, the A personality, the cream rises to the top. So these individuals become your leaders, and then they want things done right away. They want things, well, this is due next week, so give it to me today, because that gives me time to read over it and blue pencil everything. That's it. Blue pencil everything, so I can send it back to you, so you can send it back to me, so I can complain about it, and then in the last minute, of course, then I'll accept it, and the version that I'll accept is the one that you turn into me first. Oh, I love those bosses. They're so much fun. Anyway, so this is what happens to people. They get on one of those suckers. Loneliness and a lack of social support promotes stress, but the connection becomes more acute as an individual ages. And this is the problem especially with individuals who have lost their spouses one way or the other, whether they've been divorced or whether the spouses died. These individuals tend to suffer more severely than anybody else. The individuals that know what it's like to be with someone. Research by Roberman et al. In 1984, looking at myocardial infarction sufferers 3 years after the attack, had death rates 4 times higher if they had a combination of high stress and social isolation. And of course, this can be a very serious problem. The question you have to ask yourself, if you've ever watched the Christmas movie, the one with Scrooge in it, how the hell did he ever stay alive? I mean, the guy he had a high stress job, he was hostile, he was angry at everything. How in the world did he ever not die of a heart attack? And of course, in one version, he does die of a heart attack, or he dies of something. Living alone after a heart attack is associated with the risk of a recurrence of coronary heart disease as well as fatal heart attack. A study by Williams in 1996 found that the unmarried had 3 times probability of dying in the 5 years post-heart attack. So there you go. Being alone is probably the worst thing that can happen to you. Women who perceive little support either in the workplace or at home are more prone to deadly heart attacks, but researchers have discovered that the quality of an individual's relationships have a mediating effect on levels of stress. One of the things that we need to remember is that things are changing around the world. So when we talk about these things, usually we're talking about what was going on 20 years ago. That's when the research was done. So how did men act? Did men do as much housework as they do today? The answer was probably no, because they were pretty big jerks back then. So potentially when we're talking about these things may change in the future. We may see a reversal of roles where males do more housework and females do less housework. I have a niece who teaches high school, makes like over $100,000 a year teaching high school. I know, in Chicago. So there's the downside right there in Chicago. But she makes a lot of money, but she never cooks. This lady can't boil water. She's used to people, she goes to restaurants every night, for every meal. If she eats it, it's either something that she bought in a package that was already pre-made, or if she eats in a restaurant. So for breakfast, she eats, I don't know, buns or something, or donuts, those little fuzzy donuts. But she can't cook. She can't even pour herself a glass of water. I mean, it's that bad. She's that bad. Literally. Anyway, so things may change in the future. We don't know. And all of this will change. All of this health psychology stuff will change. Psychosocial vulnerability hypothesis. Hostile adults lead more stressful lives and have low levels of social support, which over time have a toxic effect on cardiovascular health. I had a friend when I was working at Ashford. Everybody hated this guy because he was a jerk. So guess what happened? Well, he had a heart attack, of course. But the problem was, of course, his problem was that he had no social support whatsoever. He had a relatively stressful life because he was in charge. And he was killing himself. So I decided that I would befriend him, which was kind of a mistake because he attacked me every chance he got. But I laughed at it usually, or I argued with him, helping him dissipate his anger and his hostility. And actually, it kept him alive, which was kind of so I'm a hero. I befriended the biggest jerk in the world. He was a biochemist, and his specialty was food preservation. And when I'm talking about food preservation, I'm not talking about, just put a little salt on it and it'll stay fresh. It's not that kind of stuff. He was creating all these toxic chemicals to put all over food to keep them relatively fresh so that you could sell them forever, like Twinkies and stuff. Jeez, what a ass. Anyway, yeah, he used to argue about whether God was alive or dead. He thought that he was alive and he could prove it. Just try that sometime. He could prove that God was alive. And he also didn't believe in global warming, which was kind of interesting. Here, this guy's a scientist and he doesn't believe in global warming. And so you can imagine how lucid the individual was. Health behavior explanation. Hostility has an indirect effect through its relationship to other cardiovascular disease risk factors, including obesity, hypertension, alcohol, and tobacco use. So the behavior explanation. It's the crap that you put in your body that kills you. Psychophysiological reactivity model. Hostility and anger act slowly to damage the arteries in the heart through unhealthy increases in blood pressure, blood levels of fat, free fatty acids, and outpourings of epinephrine and cortisol. As we know now, the cortisol actually scars the inside of your blood vessels. So the more stress that you're under, the more likely that you're going to have these divots chopped out of your blood vessels. And of course, if you have a divot, then the fat will accumulate in that divot, and then it will fill in and fill in and fill in until you have a blockage. So you need to be very careful about how much stress that you're under. Cardiovascular disease is triggered by physiological vulnerability in conjunction with a variety of psychosocial factors in a person's life. Stress from work and home environments, of course, availability of social support, whether you have social support or not, and cognitive emotional states such as hostility and anger. Of course, this is a picture of a lady that the guy has really bad halitosis, and that's why she's putting. I don't know. I found this picture and I thought it was funny. Maybe he's yelling at her. She's just trying to, or maybe he has bad breath. Let's pretend it's bad breath. It's funnier if it's bad breath, isn't it? Or maybe not. For every 1 point drop in your diastolic blood pressure, that's the second or the lowest number in your blood pressure, it reduces the chance of a myocardial infarction by 2 to 3%. Unfortunately, hypertension is often symptom-free, and for this reason it's very difficult to determine if somebody actually has high blood pressure, hypertension. You can't look at somebody and tell if they do. I think I said this last time. Means of controlling hypertension include lowering your sodium intake if you're sensitive to salt, reducing excess body weight, and exercising regularly will reduce your hypertension. Researchers have discovered that a good way to control cardiovascular disease is by reducing cholesterol by limiting intake of animal fats and hydrogenated oils. No more than 10% of your daily intake of calories should be from saturated fats. Checking your cholesterol periodically to determine your HDL and LDL ratio is very important because you're trying to maintain a high HDL and a relatively low LDL. Of course, you do need cholesterol to some extent because that makes up your entire body. Each of your cells, the cell walls, are made up of cholesterol. So cholesterol there is something important about cholesterol. You need as much HDL as possible to take out the bad cholesterol. Reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease takes a committed lifestyle, which includes a combination of stress management, aerobic exercise, relaxation training, smoking cessation, and low-fat diet. And I don't know what the Ornish program is. It happened to be, it's in your book, but I don't know anything about the Ornish program. My wife had a weight problem. She's a short lady with really short arms, which means she's that body type. So she's prone to being overweight, or at least they define her as being overweight. Unfortunately, and of course, if you're in the military wants you to be tall and slender. That's what they want you to be. But if you're from a genetic pool that is short and squat, then the probability of being able to maintain your an adequate body weight to make the military happy isn't very high. So she had a problem with her weight, and the military kept trying to get her to lose weight, and so she went on lots and lots of different weight control programs, one kind or another. But I've never really heard of the Ornish program. It must be something brand new. Stress management following a cardiovascular episode may lower rates of mortality and morbidity. Increasing social support, of course, is good. Finding friends, people that will talk to you, promoting positive thinking, lowering your hostility, and religious involvement. We just had Easter yesterday, and I hope you all had a wonderful Easter. But the more that you involve yourself with religion, potentially the less likely you are to die of cardiovascular disease. This is frustrating. I could just hold it like this. Yeah, that's what I do. Controlling a type A personality can go a long way in improving someone's chances of surviving as a heart attack victim. Controlling hostility and anger are paramount in increasing longevity. Hostile people are more likely to encounter stress and less likely to have stress-busting resources such as social support. So the more hostile you are, the less friends you have, I guess is what it's trying to say. If I just get close to it, it improves. Interventions focus on identifying triggers of anger, developing strategies for coping with the aggravation, helping participants challenge. Maybe I can push something against that. Yeah, that works. Well, but I have to do the pushing, don't I? Come on. Identifying triggers of anger, developing strategies of coping with aggravation, helping participants challenge cynical attitudes, and modifying unrealistic beliefs and expectations. My father-in-law came to visit once upon a time, many, many years ago. He brought us something. I can't remember what he brought us, but he had a trailer that he pulled behind his car. So we took the trailer in. This was a real easygoing fella. Or it seemed fairly easygoing. Anyway, so we had this trailer, and he was trying to turn it in. And the guy was being a real horse's patoot. See how nice I said that? And my father-in-law got aggravated. And I was thinking, geez, it's not that big a deal. Come on, just relax. It's going to take, 5 extra minutes? Because this guy's being a horse's rear end. And he got really agitated. I mean, really agitated and really aggravated. And I'm thinking, he's going to die. This guy's going to die. There's something else going on. He's going to die. And by God, he had a heart attack within 6 months. And he died within a year. It just broke my wife's heart. She just loved her dad. She was a daddy's girl. So it really upset her a lot, but I knew he was going to die. I mean, I had seen this in the hospital over and over and over and over again. And I knew it. It's like he had a halo around his head or something, and I could identify it. It was really spooky. Anyway, he did die. It wasn't my fault. I didn't have anything to do with it. It was, but he was aggravated. He was really, really aggravated. And it was the aggravation that killed him. In normal humans, humans without diabetes or hypoglycemia, glucose is regulated by the action of insulin and glucagon. And those of us who don't have diabetes, of course, we've got normal levels of insulin, we've got normal levels of glucagon, and if we don't, then we have a real serious problem. Because our bodies they try to balance themselves with this glucagon and with the insulin. The insulin makes your cells use the glucose, and the glucagon increases the glucose level in your body. And it's this constant balancing act. But our bodies, this is how we survive. So when we get hungry, of course, we get hungry for food that will feed that balance. And so we eat what we eat, and our bodies feel what it needs to eat. Glucagon stimulates the release of glucose, causing blood glucose levels to rise. Insulin, of course, decreases blood sugar by causing cells to take up glucose. Insulin and glucagon are produced in the pancreas in cells called the islets of Langerhans. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks the islet cells that produce insulin and glucagon, and eventually it will kill off all the cells. This is your own body destroying your insulin-producing capability. Diabetes mellitus is a disorder of the endocrine system in which the body is unable to produce insulin. That's type 1 diabetes, or it's unable to properly utilize this pancreatic hormone, and that's type 2 diabetes. You can't use insulin properly. Your cells become insensitive to insulin. So now we need to give you something to force your cells to be sensitive to glucose, or to the insulin, so that you can utilize the glucose. That's type 2 diabetes. Potentially you can control type 2 diabetes by exercising and with your diet. Potentially you can do that, as long as it's not too far along. We can't cure it. We can't cure diabetes. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't make your cells more sensitive to insulin. We can't do surgery that makes your cells more sensitive to insulin. We can't, once those cells are dead, we can't put them back in. It just doesn't work that way. Heredity and lifestyle seem to play a role in both types of diabetes. Diabetes affects 25 million people in the United States. 25 million people in the United States have diabetes. That's about 8.3% of the population. That's a lot of people with diabetes. Diabetes is the third most common chronic illness. It is the seventh leading cause of death in the United States. The annual cost of diabetes is about $174 billion. Wouldn't it be nice to get that money back? But it's also nice to have people that are still alive. People who have diabetes are twice as likely to die as cohorts without diabetes. So you're on a clock. If you have diabetes, you're on a clock. And and you can add to that clock, but you can also subtract from that clock. I had a friend that was a type 1 diabetic. All of his life, he was born with diabetes mellitus. He had to take insulin shots every morning. He either took them in his thigh or he took them in his stomach. And he did this every day from when he was just a baby. He decided that he wanted to be cool. Don't we all? So he decided he wanted to become a hippie. And hippies at that time were smoking pot, and they were drinking alcohol, and they were being cool. So he decided he would do that. He was really, really smart. He had an IQ that was in the 160, 170 range. This guy was brilliant. He came up with a formula that he used. That if he wanted to go out drinking, alcohol, of course, turns into sugar right away, as soon as it hits your belly. So he came up with a formula. So he would give himself shots of insulin. He would increase his shot of insulin if he was going to go out and get drunk that night. Now that works okay, except when you're drunk, you're kind of damn stupid. I mean, you're real stupid. So sometimes he would drink more than he was supposed to. He would go into a diabetic, he'd have a diabetic crisis, and sometimes he'd go into a coma. Sometimes he didn't drink as much as he thought he was going to drink because he couldn't find anybody that would give him enough beer. I think he was a beer drinker, if I'm not mistaken, which is probably the worst alcohol for a diabetic to drink. Anyway, he died at 39. He killed himself. Well, in essence, he was killing himself for years, for decades, because he was trying to shoot himself up with excess amounts of insulin in order for him to... he got it wrong enough that his skin was turning thick. It was thickening. If you touched his hands, they felt like calluses, but it was a thickening of his skin. It was like leprosy. I mean, it was really kind of nasty. And that's because he didn't get it right every time. Sometimes he would say, "You got to give me another beer. You got to give me another beer. You know, I need one more beer to take care of this stuff." I never drank with the guy. I got this story from other individuals that were with him. And of course, you know, I don't know if you've ever been around people that drink, but they're not always very accommodating. They're not always trying to give you what you need. They're not always trying to do nice things for you. Sometimes they just want more beer than you get. They want to get a better buzz than they've got right now. So sometimes he suffered for his diabetes. And he died at age 39, unfortunately. My friend, he was my best friend in high school. Unfortunately. Well, or fortunately, I guess. Anyway, so he died. And he died because he wanted to be a hippie. He wanted to be cool like his brother. His brother was a hippie, so he wanted to be cool like his brother. And of course, I could see this and I watched this and I knew that this was not a very happy life that this guy was leading. It is estimated that 57 million people in the United States are pre-diabetic. They have a blood sugar that is high but not high enough for diabetes, and this is known as pre-diabetic. The people who are pre-diabetic are at an increased risk to develop type 2 diabetes, of course. They have a higher risk of heart disease, and they have a higher risk of stroke because of their high glucose level. Excess amounts of glucose will harden your arteries, and this is a bad situation. This can be a bad situation. And because of that, these people tend to have more problems that other people don't have. Surprisingly, the United States is not the area that has the most diabetes. There are areas in Mexico has more diabetes than the United States does. This is Guyana and Suriname. In South America, Chile has more diabetes than in the United States. North Africa, Egypt has high diabetes levels. Saudi Arabia, strangely enough, has higher diabetes levels than people in the United States. Singapore has high diabetes levels. So as you can see, there are places that are worse off than we are. And most of them, well, I don't know. Huge chunks of South and Central America. It's really kind of weird. Mexico, who would have thought? Happiest people in the world, people from Finland. Mexico is like right behind them. Happy people. However, rates are okay. Diabetes is absent or rare in select developing countries in Africa and Eastern and Mediterranean and the Western Pacific. However, rates run from 14 to 20% in some Arab, Asian, Indian, Chinese, and Hispanic American populations. And that is the way it works. In the United States, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and American Indians have higher rates of adult onset diabetes than European Americans, Asian Americans, or Cuban Americans, oddly enough. So we have Hispanic Americans, which have people from Mexico have relatively high diabetes rates, but people from Cuba don't. Any idea why? What's going on in Mexico? What's going on in Cuba that keeps them from getting diabetes? Any ideas? Does anybody know anything about the Cuban culture or the Mexican culture? About 20 years ago, if you ate tacos and they had refried beans in there, then your refried beans were mixed with lard, with pig fat. You think I'm kidding? It's pig fat. They cooked their tortillas in pig fat. It was all lard. So by golly, if back in the 70s, 1970s, if you went to a taco stand, wow, and your tongue would stick to the roof of your mouth because there was so much pig fat in there. As fun as that is. So what about Cuban Americans? Why don't Cubans have as high a diabetes rate? What kind of food do they eat? They had pigs over there too. They eat a lot more fruits and vegetables. Animal fat tends to be the main course down in Mexico. They eat a lot of pork. Eat a lot of chicken, but they also eat a lot of pork. They eat a lot more pork than they eat chicken. You get a lot more meat out of raising a pig than you do out of raising chickens. And then they cook everything in pig fat. But the Cubans eat a lot of bananas, they eat a lot of plantains, which are almost the same thing as bananas. I don't like them myself, but sorry. Type 1 diabetes has also been called juvenile diabetes or insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease in which the immune system attacks the insulin and glucagon-producing islet cells of the pancreas. Symptoms of type 1 diabetes include excessive thirst and urination, craving for sweets, weight loss, fatigue due to the body's inability to metabolize glucose for energy. So you're tired all the time, you're peeing all the time, and you're drinking all the time because you're really, 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 really thirsty. Peak incidence of type 1 diabetes occurs around puberty, 10 to 12 years of age in females and 12 to 14 years of age in males. Type 1 diabetes accounts for 5 to 10% of all diabetes cases. Symptoms seem to mimic the flu. You have excessive thirst, frequent urination, unusual weight loss, extreme fatigue, and irritability. We had a guy that came in to the emergency room. This guy was a retired Air Force colonel. Had flown B-17s in World War II. Real funny guy. Well, he would be funny, except he came in a coma. That's funny. Anyway, he came in a coma, and we drew his blood. We ran his glucose level. It was so high, we had to dilute it. We had to dilute his blood, his serum, in order to get an accurate reading. It was over 500. Normal glucose guy. He should have been dead. He should have been dead. But he developed his diabetes so gradually that his body got used to 200 and 300 and 400. And then 500 was a little bit much. This guy he was a mess. He was so skinny. Oh my God, he looked like a skeleton. And of course, he showed us pictures of when he was flying B-17 during World War II, and he's kind of a chubby guy. And he showed us pictures later on, and he's kind of a chubby guy. And here, all of a sudden, the weight just fell off him. It's really kind of amazing. So he tried to bring his daughter in to have her blood drawn, and she wouldn't come in. We couldn't get her to come in. She came in with it. She brought him in one time. It was a trick. He was trying to get her to have her blood drawn, but she didn't want to have her blood drawn. Gorgeous. Oh, she was so cute. She had the worst breath of anybody I've ever met. I mean, it was horrible because these people will put off ketones, and ketones stink. They really smell bad. So she had this really horrible breath. So in order to combat her bad breath, she used to drink all the time. I mean, I'm not talking about beer. Beer doesn't really cover your bad breath. She was drinking vodka, tequila, and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so what happens? It was a couple weeks later that she came in. She came into the coma, and of course she was diabetic, just like her old man was. And her glucose was in the 480 range. And of course we saved both of their lives. So you guys worry, we saved their life. It was my job to save her life because I had to run her glucose. But she was a mess. cute, really cute, but boy, I'll tell you what, her breath, you could smell her breath across the room, and it was nasty. It was ketones she was drinking, or she had ketones, she was putting out ketones. Kind of an interesting thing. So I became real sensitive to ketones on people's breath. Because if you have ketones, it means that you're burning your fat instead of sugar. So when my wife would go on a diet, of course, she would start doing that. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a diet, is you burn your body fat rather than the glucose. So she was controlling her diet and burning fat, and that's what she wanted to do, but then again, she started putting out ketones. Wow, kissing my wife was painful at some points in my life, as ugly as that is. Okay, the people at greatest risk for type 1 diabetes are people with a family history of type 1 diabetes. And of course, when she started putting off ketones, I always told her, honey, you're putting off ketones, so you're obviously burning fat. I hope that makes you happy. But you need to be careful, because you can develop diabetes if you're not careful. Children of parents with type 1 diabetes are more susceptible to become diabetic. Siblings of people with type 1 diabetes, of course, are also more likely to develop diabetes. Type 1 diabetes affects males and females equally. Highest prevalence rates are among European Americans. That's with type 1 diabetes. So you guys are okay. Don't have to worry about type 1 diabetes. You don't have you don't have a ancestral history of it. It's not in your genes. It is in my genes, of course. There's always a possibility. I don't have it personally in my genes, but I'm a European American, so I'm more likely to have type 1 diabetes. However, let's talk about type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is also called adult onset diabetes or non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Type 2 diabetes is a more common and milder form of the disease that usually appears after age 30 and accounts for 90 to 95% of the diabetes cases in the United States. So far more type 2 diabetes than type 1 diabetes. Used to be about 50-50. But as people started eating crappier and crappier food, we started having more people coming down with type 2 diabetes. As the Hispanic population increased in the United States, we had more people with type 2 diabetes. African Americans were brought over here in groups and masses. There were some people that were tall and slender, and there were some people that were kind of tall, but they were also kind of chubby. These individuals developed type 2 diabetes relatively readily. Not the tall, slender guys, but the short, squat fellows, or they're not really short, but the squat individuals. These individuals tended to be enslaved in certain areas. They were able to survive heat a lot better than the tall, slender people. The humidity, these were individuals from the rainforests of Africa. These individuals tended to go to areas that would kill off tall, slender people. Does this make sense? We usually don't talk about slavery and how certain parts of the United States had groups of individuals that looked one way, and other places had groups of individuals that looked another way. But the reality is, the people that lived along the Mississippi Delta, where it's extremely humid, these individuals tended to be relatively heavy individuals. Okay. They weren't especially short, but they were big people. So if you go to the Mississippi Delta now, you can find people that are normally in the high 200s, low 300s range, up to 400 and 500 pounds. And this isn't abnormal. And it's because those are the individuals that were able to survive that environment along the Mississippi Delta. The Mississippi Delta runs all the way up runs from Memphis to New Orleans. So if you go to that area and you wander around in the small towns, there's some pretty damn big people. If you go to the other side of Mississippi and look at the African American population, they're a lot more. They're not nearly as large. They didn't need to be as large. So the individuals that were large were able to survive in that horrible, humid, highly humid environment. And for that reason, these individuals develop diabetes at a much higher rate because they had larger masses of body fat. Okay, so these individuals tended to develop type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes results from insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, where the cells either become intolerant to insulin or insensitive to it. So what do? How in the world are we going to save these people's lives? Well, in the beginning, of course, we had no medication. So the only thing we could tell people with type 2 diabetes was control your diet and exercise. And if they did it, they survived. If they didn't do it, they died. And there was not a whole lot we could do about it. Now, of course, we have a medication that makes their cells more sensitive. And that is a medication called metformin. It works, it really does work. And we can give it to individuals who have type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes affects more women than men. Why? Why would it affect more women than men? What is it about women that makes you more susceptible to type 2 diabetes? That you have to maintain fat in order to ovulate. And if you put on fat, where do you put it on? Where's the last place you're going to lose it? If you think that you're too fat, where's the last place you're going to? Your abdomen, of course. The first place you lose it is from your breasts, and then your thighs, and then your abdomen. Eventually, it gets to your abdomen, but this is the area that seems to cause type 2 diabetes. So the fatter your gut, the more likely that you will develop type 2 diabetes. Men, that's the first place that they will lose fat. If they decide to go on a diet, the first place they will lose fat is in their abdomen. They may want to try to reduce their thighs. It ain't going to work. They're going to reduce in their abdomen first, and then it will spread throughout the rest of their body. Type 2 diabetes requires a strict regimen of diet and exercise, of course. And this is something that we used to do for people. We used to put them on this diet. We used to tell them that they needed to exercise. They needed to exercise this much in order to stay alive. And if they did it, they lived. And if they didn't do it, they died. Type 2 diabetes is more prevalent in people over the age of 45 with a family history of diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is more common in people who are overweight, but especially people who carry their weight in their waists. Type 2 diabetes is more prevalent in people with a low HDL cholesterol or high triglycerides. Symptoms of type 2 diabetes include all of the symptoms of type 1 diabetes, plus blurred vision, frequent infections, cuts that are slow to heal, tingling or numbness in hands or feet. And of course they have an advertisement on television. Cedric, the entertainer, is the spokesman for whatever this medication is. And he talks about how his father suffered from type 2 diabetes, and he had aching and tingling in his feet. And he understands your pain because of his father. And of course that's one of the problems is you heal very slowly. And the reason is because of poor circulation. Remember, hyperglycemia will cause your blood vessels to harden, so it's very difficult for you to get circulation into your extremities. And for that reason, individuals suffering from type 2 diabetes are more likely to require amputation of their extremities because they can't get circulation to their extremities. So you need to exercise. While type 1 diabetes is more common among European Americans, type 2 diabetes is more prevalent among minorities, African Americans, especially the Delta individuals from the Delta, American Indians, of course, Hispanic Americans, Asian and Pacific Islander Americans, and people of a low socioeconomic status because the food quality is relatively poor, can be very poor. My son survived on ramen noodles, peanut butter, and tuna fish when he was living in New York City. Oh, he's actually living in New Jersey. And he'd walk across the bridge every day in order to go to work, which was stupid. He thought he was pretty, so that he wanted to be a model or an actor. And he almost starved to death, the poor kid. He worked in a strip joint. Cleaning up. Ugh. Poor kid. You gotta feel sorry for him. But he had a dream, and of course it never came to fruition. But anyway, so the minorities tend to have problems. Why Hispanic Americans? Why American Indians? Well, I guess we've talked about that before. Hispanic Americans have ancestry that is American Indian. And that's one of the reasons why. It is predicted that 7.2% of the population will have type 2 diabetes by 2050, and that's an awful lot of people. 7.2% of the population. Hypoglycemia is where the blood sugar level is too low. Diabetes is actually chronic hyperglycemia, where the blood sugar level of course, is chronically too high. Unregulated blood sugar increases risk of many health complications, including the development of atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. Hypoglycemia is really kind of interesting because it looks like depression. The person has no energy. All they do is want to sit down all the time. So it looks like depression. It also looks like schizophrenia in some situations because your brain's not getting enough glucose. And because your brain is not getting enough glucose, a lot of times the behavior is erratic. They have erratic behavior patterns. So it's really kind of interesting. Hypoglycemia looks like mental illness, looks like depression or schizophrenia. About 5 to 10% of women will develop temporary situational diabetes during pregnancy. And this, of course, is known as gestational diabetes. Somewhere around their 4th or 5th month, the demand on their body will result in a greater demand on their insulin than they can produce. One of the realities of pregnancy is that it's hard on the woman's body. Depending on her genetics, her body may be able to handle it with no problem at all, or her body may react negatively to the pregnancy. Sometimes if she has that genetic structure, potentially one of the things that will happen is that she will develop high blood pressure, or she'll develop gestational diabetes because her body is reacting negatively to the pregnancy. The more she exercises, it's not just genetics, it also has to do with what she was doing before her pregnancy. So if she exercised, she didn't have a lot of body fat, or didn't have excessive amounts of body fat, then potentially she won't have any problems with her pregnancy. But of course, gestational diabetes is one of the problems. If she is exercising and she doesn't have a lot of body fat, but she has a high sugar level, she's pre-diabetic, then she will develop gestational diabetes during her pregnancy. Somewhere around their 4th, okay, we've already talked about that.
251.
I'm sorry?
251.
251. Oh, I'm sorry, it's time to stop. I apologize. Thank you for reminding me. I would go on for like ever, but we have enough.